Hi everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Daisy tutorial. This is where I left off in part 1. So I'm just going to continue on with this petal here. So here I'm painting on the dry paper just with the grey mix. Now the grey mix was the French ultramarine mixed with the burnt sienna. I tend to put a bit more of the French ultramarine into that grey mix just to cool it down. So I'm just looking at my reference photo and I'm just putting the paint where I see it. So just here on this edge, I just want to soften it. So just here. So I've got my damp brush and I can rub it over the paint there and that just softens that edge away. So before that grey paint dries, I just drop some Winsor Violet onto it. And that just adds interest to the grey. So the grey paint here is still slightly damp from when I painted it. Now there's a little bit of colour over here next to this other petal. And I run it down the edge. Hold it right up on its tip so that I get that fine point. Now I've switched to my liner brush just so that I can bring this edge in here just with the grey paint. Holding it right up on its point again. Brush is perpendicular to the paper. Okay, so over on this petal I've got a dark section here with a white highlight down the pencil line there. So I've got two ways I can do this. I can dampen the paper first and then put the paint on and let the soft edge bleed across. Or I could put the paint on the dry paper and then use my damp brush to remove the highlight. So I think I'll do the second way. I'll put it on the dry paper and then I'll use my damp brush to create that highlight down there. So I'm just going to put the paint on the dry paper. And I've got to work reasonably quickly so that the paint doesn't dry. So once I've got that on there, I can wash the paint out of my brush, take the moisture off my brush, and then just use the damp brush. So it's just damp. And I run it along that edge where I see the highlight on the reference photo. And that just takes a bit of paint off. And it creates that soft edge where the highlight is. So I'll wipe the brush on a cloth and every now and then I'll wash the paint out and dry it again and start again until I get it the way I want it. And I can come back with my liner brush and just a bit more of the violet paint, the Winsor Violet. And I just blend that with the grey. So I'm just going to put a little bit more of the violet just along here. And now I'm just taking a touch more of that paint off with my damp brush. Sometimes you've got to do it more than once. Okay, so I dried that off and now I can paint the other side. So this side I'm painting on the dry paper as well. And you can see that I've got that highlight there now that I've got the paint against it. So I'm just looking at my reference photo and I can see that I've got to leave some white paper showing. And I just want to feather off that paint at the front there. Just taking off just a small amount of paint here again. Just along that centre section. And I've got some violet now, some Winsor violet. Okay, so now I can paint the final section of the petal over here. It's quite pale, there's not a great deal of colour over here. So I just leave a gap for the highlight, and then I put the paint on, just on the dry paper. So this is the grey mix, the French ultramarine and the burnt sienna mixed together. And then before that dries, I'll just drop a bit of Winsor violet on there just to add interest. That just bleeds across the grey. Now I don't like that edge just here, so I'm just going to feather that paint out a bit with my brush. Just pull it out. And now I want to just run a little bit of grey paint along the edge of the petal, so just over the top of the pencil line. Okay, so over here I'm just going to put some grey paint on the curved over part, or the underside of the petal. The paper's dry here and the colour's very pale. It's just the grey mix. Okay, I'm just going to switch brushes, and before that grey dries, I'll just drop some Winsor violet in there. So now I'm just putting some water on the top side. I just want to put some colour along this edge, but I want the colour to bleed from the outer edge into the petal. So I've put the water there just to dampen the paper. So now I've got the grey again. I'm running it along the edge of the petal, and then it just bleeds across the water. And I just bring in the rest of the edge just on the dry paper there. Now just here, I just want to soften away that edge a bit, just with my damp brush. Just tidies it up. Now I've got a bit of the Winsor violet with my liner brush. I'm running that along the edge. That just bleeds across the grey paint. And then I can paint over this other edge with it. Okay, up to this petal now, I've got the grey paint again. This time I'm painting on the dry paper, just filling in this first section of it. It's darker at the top, but as it works its way down, it gets paler in colour. So I'm just going to stop the paint there and then wash out my brush and use a damp brush just to soften away that paint edge. And I can jump over to this other side so that I don't disturb that section I just painted. Do the same thing with the grey paint, just on the dry paper. This time the darker colour goes all the way to the centre. Just going to wash out my brush and dab off the excess moisture, and just take a bit of paint off the front here, just with a damp brush. Drop a bit of violet onto the lower section. Now for this middle section, again I'm painting on the dry paper, just with the grey mix. Now I've switched to my little liner brush again and some Winsor violet there while that grey paint's damp. Down here I just want some more grey paint, slightly darker than what I was just using. And some reflective sap green there. Just dropping that on the grey paint. So that's just reflecting from the centre. This one over here, I'm painting on the dry paper again. There's a darker section on this side of the petal, so I can paint that in, just with the grey. Now there's no colour on the tip of the petal. So now I've got some Winsor Violet again with my liner brush, and I'm just going to paint on those darker sections that I see. It just runs down the side of this shadow here. And there's another one just here, slightly darker. So I just let the paint bleed with the grey paint. And I try not to fuss with it too much, I just let it do what it wants to do. Okay, so that area there has dried now. Now I'm just dampening the rest of the petal with some water. And I just want to run some paint down this side to bring that edge of the petal in. So this is the grey, I'm using my liner brush. And because the paper's damp, it just bleeds across from the edge slightly. Need a little bit more paint. So then I can take my damp brush and soften anything away that I don't like. Okay, over to this one. You can see there's a fairly dark shadow there on it. So this is the grey mix, just on the dry paper. Now I've got some Winsor Violet with my liner brush, and I'm just putting that in the darker section. You can see that the dark section itself has got areas of light and dark. So I'm just putting the Winsor Violet on the darker parts. I use my liner brush so that I don't put a lot of paint on. I don't want to flood it completely with the violet. I still want to see the grey. So now I've just got my damp brush again, and I'm just taking off a highlight. There's a highlight down there in that bottom section. It's a bit lighter. So over this side I've got a very pale shadow. Just painting that on the dry paper with the grey. And there's a section down the middle of the petal that's darker. So I'm just painting that on with the grey as well. Okay, so down the bottom here I want to put some sap green. Again, just as a reflective colour that reflects off that centre part. And also some violet up here just so that it matches the other colour on the petal. And then a really pale little shadow just down in here between those two bigger shadows, just with the grey. There's another one here. And now I can paint the edge in with my liner brush and the grey paint again, just running it over the pencil line. This one tucked in here can get some grey on it. Just make sure that the one next to it is dry before you paint it on. And then I use the liner just to bring in the rest of it. Damp brush again, just to take a touch of paint off there. So over to this one, I can see a shadow here. So this is the grey. I've got a little bit more pigment mixed into it now, it's slightly darker. So this is the French ultramarine mixed with the burnt sienna. Now I've just got a damp brush and I can pull the paint that's there down towards the centre. And I can pull some of it back up. So just a damp brush here, softens away those hard edges, and then I can use that paint that's on the paper now just to pull it up further. So I don't need a lot of paint. I've left a little highlight there on the right hand side of this petal. Now I've got some sap green, again some reflective light here. And now some Windsor violet. And then I can paint on the edge with the grey and the liner brush. It's just a little bit of a shadow here as well. Okay, second last petal. So this one that I just painted on the left has dried, I'm not disturbing it. This is the grey paint again on the dry paper. It's quite dark down at the bottom there. And there's a dark shadow in the middle of the petal. And then I've got that highlighted section next to it. So I leave the white paper showing for the highlight, and then I just paint the paint up the other side. And again, some sap green here. Just on the damp paint. And take some paint off with my damp brush just to create that highlight that I see down in the darker section. So all of this I have to do before the paint dries. A little bit of violet up here as well. And this area is damp as well because I've just painted it. Softening away that edge there. And I've got a touch more violet just up here. And the paint is actually starting to dry up here. I'm just softening away that edge there with a damp brush. Down here, I'm just putting some perylene green that sap green is still damp, so it's just bleeding with it. Just needed to darken that section down in there. And now I'm just using this damp brush just to pull that paint up a bit. Okay, last petal. Dry paper and the grey paint. Just paint it on where I see the shadow, and then I'll paint some Winds of Violet in there just to darken some sections of it. And this is the Winds of Violet now. So that grey paint's still damp. So the two colours just merge together. Just softening away that edge there. There's nothing on my brush at the moment. And then the liner brush just tidies up those edges. Just with the grey paint. I need to bring this one in here too with the grey paint. And now my damp brush will pull a bit of paint just off the side there to create that soft highlight that's in there. So now everything has dried and I can see a cast shadow on this petal that's formed by the petal beside it. So I've just got some grey paint here and I'm just painting straight over the top of the work that I've completed. Everything has dried though. There's also a shadow here on the side of this petal. So this is just the grey mix on the dry paper, painting over the top of the work that I've completed. Okay, on this one here, I just want to drop a bit of the sap green down at the bottom as well. So before that dries, I'll pick up some sap green and pop it in there. So just down the bottom here, just a touch of sap green. Now I've got a damp brush, I'm just softening away that paint edge. And there's another little cast shadow down in here, so I'm just painting some grey paint there as well, just on the dry paper again. Just runs up beside that petal that's beside this one. I want a touch more colour on this one too down the side. So I've just got some grey paint again. Just on the dry paper here. Okay, over here on this one, I just want to fix up this shadow that I painted earlier. So I've got some grey paint, I'm just painting on the dry paper. Softening away the edges that I don't like. Okay, over here I just want to darken it slightly, so I've got some grey paint, painting on the dry paper. So I'm just softening that edge there. And beside it here, I just want it to be darker, so I've got a touch of the Windsor Violet again. I might still have a bit of grey in my brush as well. Damp brush again, softens away that edge. And slightly darker here with the grey paint. And then I soften away that edge at the top and at the bottom. I want it slightly darker along this edge as well. So the grey paint again on the dry paper here. Now a damp brush just pulls that paint down further. Just a bit more paint here. That's the grey. And some here too. So I'm just going around there, Daisy, looking at the reference photo and looking at my painting and just seeing where I can make the paint just a touch darker than what I've got it. Just softening away the edges there. I can see it's a bit darker here as well. And also there. It's a little bit darker here as well. Now down under here I've got my liner brush and some of the sap green. Now I just want to deepen the colour on the centre of the flower down here at the base. So I've put some water there. I don't need the water to go over the entire centre because I'll only be working down this bottom section. I'm going to use the Perylene green again. So I dab it on. Because the paper's damp, it just bleeds away. So just up here I want to put some more water because I want to darken the sap green paint now. So instead of using the Perylene green now I've got sap green on my brush. It's fairly dark, so I've wiped my brush over the pigment where it's squirted out on the palette. The same with the Perylene green. When I used that, I wiped my damp brush over the Perylene green where it's squirted out. So now I'm just using my damp brush there just to soften away that edge. And I'll also use it to push the pigment up just a bit further so that it's not all concentrated in that bottom corner. Now for the stem, I'm just painting a wash of the sap green over the top of it. I'll feather it off at the bottom here of the paper, just down here. Just a damp brush now, just to feather that away. I'll switch to my liner brush just to tidy up the edge where it touches the petals. And now I've got some Perylene green and I just paint that up near the petals and run it down the right hand side. That just blends with the sap green. Okay, up here again, I'm just putting a bit more colour on the petals. I've got Windsor Violet here. I'm using my liner brush, painting on the dry paper. So I'm just putting the finishing touches on it now. Do the same thing here with the Windsor Violet. little bit here as well. So over here on this one that's tucked in behind, I just want to darken the colour slightly. So this is the Windsor Violet again. Just painting on the dry paper. A little bit in here as well. Also want a touch of it over here. So all of this is just Windsor Violet on the dry paper. Just softening that edge up further, just with the damp brush. A little bit over here too. So I'm just looking at my reference photo and I'm looking for the darker spots. And that's where I'm painting the Windsor Violet. When you're painting it and it's damp, you think it's dark enough, but after it's dried, you can see that it's not quite dark enough. So I'm just coming back now and just painting a few little darker areas here and there. Softening that edge there. A little bit on this one as well. Now I take my damp brush again and I soften away the edges. A little bit of the Windsor Violet down in here too. Just softening that edge away. Now I just want to paint a slightly darker colour under here on the edge of this one, just so that it stands out a bit more. Now I use my damp brush just to tease that paint out, soften the edge. A little bit more of the sap green here, just on the dry paper. And I think that's just about it. So there's my finished painting. So thanks everybody, I hope you enjoyed the class.